Hey, this is Michael Lindsay from Vital MX. We're out here for the 2022 450 Shootout. As you can see, we have all 7 of the current 450 motocross bikes lined up here. We've got 6 test riders. We've spent a couple days testing these motorcycles, doing all the available changes of what's stock and available bikes, the clickers, the ECU settings, anything you can really do off the showroom floor to try to decide between all of our riders which bike we liked best. Now, if you're watching this feature, there's actually 3 ways to learn about the Shootout. The one you're watching right now is the shortest and sweetest way. I'm gonna break down over about 2 minutes of each bike and why they finished where they did and give you the results. We're also gonna have a roundtable video that you should find in a link either above me, in the bio below, or anything like that. That's gonna sit down with the riders. We're gonna break down our whole experience. There's also the article on vitalmx.com, which has dyno charts, weights, more data, and just a much more large grasp of information. Basically, our end goal is to make your next buying decision easier. Like I said, at the end of the day, we are crowning an overall winner. That is what we believe as a group was the collective best bike out of the box for the year for all of us. But at the same time, the winner of the Shootout may still not be the bike for you. These bikes all have different characteristics, things that are good and bad. And if you really want to learn which motorcycle you should pick, which one's best for you, read everything. Read the guys' opinions, kind of figure out who you identify with, because ultimately at the end of the day, the reason we go through all this effort is to make sure that you get the motorcycle that you want so you have the best riding experience possible. We're going to jump right into the results now. Finishing 7th place with 7th place scores across the board with all of our test riders is sadly to no surprise, the Suzuki RM-Z450. Now, we're not going to turn this into a bash fest. Yes, the Suzuki keeps finishing down here, but that does not make it a bad bike. Anything in this Shootout, if it's, the characteristics we're talking about is something you think you're going to like, you're probably still going to enjoy it. The Suzuki still has the good going for it that everybody talks about every year, that sharp edge handling, that great turning character. You can get into any kind of into the tighter ruts than you can get to on most bikes. So the handling characteristic in that sense is positive. The motor has really good low to mid character. It's very torquey. It's got a nice little snap response to it, but it's a little bit of a heavier engine character, especially on decel. Maybe doesn't have quite the top end legs that some of the other bikes in the class do. It just has a little bit of an older 4-stroke character to it. On top of that, the bike, feels a little bit heavier and it's a little on the harder side to set up. It hasn't updated the suspension on this bike since it was introduced in 18 and still has a little bit of issues with the BFR shock, some of the bike balance, and just trying to find some of the comfort that we're able to get a lot quicker with the other bikes we tested. Landing in the 6th position is the Husqvarna FC450. As you can see by the scores, a little bit farther down the list for most riders, but we're beginning this midfield that's really tight, as you'll see by the next couple scores. Now, of course, we have 3 Austrians in here. They're all really similar, but the Husky has something unique to it. It has a lower set of suspension stock, 10 millimeters less stroke front and rear, and honestly, all the test riders were just trying to get to feel more like its brethren. We were running higher sag numbers, pushing the fork farther out on this bike, trying to get it stiffer, get it up in the stroke and get it to where you could ride it aggressively. So the settings in this bike are supposed to be a little bit more comfort and vet oriented, and definitely in low speed sections, just kind of cruising around, you can feel that in the bike. But when you really want to get up and push your pace, and we're not even talking about our pro riders here, we're talking about some of our novice and intermediates, they just feel like when they really want to push it, the bike doesn't have the control. It's a little on the wallowy side, it sinks in a little bit, and we were just trying to get it up and feeling a little bit more aggressive. The engine character on is very linear and broad, which is excellent, but it is a little bit slow and lethargic off the bottom. Once again, just has a more mellow overall tone. It has some great extras. The Magura hydraulic clutch is better than most of the hydraulics in the class. It has a little bit more engagement distance. Brakes are excellent, a lot of the finishing features, and it has great adjustability. But at the end of the day, they've gone for a certain direction with it, and just for the majority of our riders, it didn't quite suit them well enough to finish higher up the rankings. Locking down the 5th position is the Kawasaki KX450. As you can see by the scores, this nudged out the Husqvarna just a little bit. It had some favorable opinion with some of our test riders. Honestly, everybody I talked to in the group did like this bike genuinely. There's just a few things with the setup out of the box that really are kind of outside of our control. The chassis is really well balanced on it, has great comfort, and has a great range of setup. It's not as maybe sharp on agility or turn-in as some of the bikes in the class, but generally has a good overall feel. Suspension-wise is the big negative, is the front fork is just kind of hard to set up on this bike. You've heard probably guys for years say something about going to a stiffer spring rate in one leg, adding some oil height. And it's mostly because it's just very soft, doesn't have a lot of speed sensitivity or holdup. And if you try to chase that by going stiffer, maybe a little quicker with the rebound, it just takes a lot of the comfort away. And no matter really what track we were at or which test rider, they kind of just struggled with getting that front fork dialed in. The engine character is really responsive, it has great mapping, and it's fairly broad, but it's a little bit down on output. We rode 2 tracks that were a bit power demanding, Glen Helen with the hills, and then a sand track. Well, we had some rain out here our last day in California. And all these, the guys said, man, I can ride this bike more to its potential, it feels like power-wise, but when you really bury it or you're climbing the hills, you can just tell you're down a little bit on total output. The bike, of course, has great adjustability, handlebars, foot pegs, a lot of good features the Kawis had for a few years. Like I said, it's just down to getting the bike balance and being able to really push it to its limit. Seems a bit harder on this machine than some of the bikes that beat it farther up the field. Edging out the Kawasaki KX450 by only 1 point is the Honda CRF450R. The Honda came in with an all-new generation bike last year, and when Honda does that, man, they come in swinging. They really went for a bike that was better for the masses, more balance on the chassis, easier to set up. They kept that great mid to top power character they had, but tried to mellow out the bottom end. The problem with that power character was, though, ECU was not well mapped. Basically, had a bike that garbled, it hesitated, it cut out a little bit, and it made it harder to ride down low than it needed to be. They've come in this year, that was one of their main focuses, is that ECU update. It's better, but man, it's still not perfect. It's still a little bit dirty feeling off the bottom. It's not as connected as it could be. Like I said, better, still not quite where it needs to be. All 3 maps have their positives and their negatives. None of them are really just what we were looking for. Like I said, though, the overall character of the engine's good. For the suspension side, though, this year they went stiffer. Last year, the balance of the bike was better than the prior year, but we had a bit of teetering going on. A little bit on the soft side. They tried to come in stiffer this year, bring the ride height up and keep that balance perfect. They did accomplish that, but in the process, they got rid of some of the comfort, made the front end feel a little bit too rigid, a little bit of feedback. Some guys just couldn't quite find what they were looking for at each track, as rough as it was. Overall, the Honda has some great ergonomics, great rider triangle, a lot of really neat features on the electronic sides with 3 engine maps, 3 torque control maps, launch control, a lot of goodies to play with and really set this bike up for yourself. But that's what we were missing out of the box. It just took a little bit too much tinkering to find something that worked as well as some of the other bikes above it in the rankings. Now we're getting into our podium positions, and as you can see by the scores, these last 3 bikes, man, they're pretty well received all around. And locking in 3rd place is the KTM 450 SXF. 450 KTM is deep into its generation, so it's had plenty of refinements, and KTM's tagline is ready to race. That's a lot of how this bike feels out of the box. The chassis, the ergonomics, the suspension really reward the aggressive rider in our group. Part of that, though, for some of the guys in the group was maybe trying to find a little bit of comfort from the machine, but it wasn't too terribly hard to find. You could go a little bit up on air pressure to get it higher in the stroke and get it off the initial part where it was diving. A couple changes from the clickers here and there, and everybody was kind of finding stuff that they liked right off the bat. So the real positive there is that good turn-in response, real nimble feel on the KTM, the overall physical lightweight. Some of the drawbacks for the guys, though, is it is a little rigid on the front end. It's because, once again, it's so race feeling. There isn't some of the comfort that we're looking for at all times. And then the motor character can be a little bit of a contention. It is very broad, it's very linear. At times, some of the guys were looking for maybe a little bit more pickup initially, something that has a little bit more of a sharp character, but KTM has kind of taken the really aggressive chassis and tried to mix it with a motor that you can ride to its potential. So it is a bike that maybe isn't as exciting at times as others, but man, you can really just put in good lap times on it. Man, for its first year in the Shootout, GasGas got 2nd place with their MC450. Yes, it is just kind of another colored KTM, but there's a few things about this bike that on paper may sound like a negative, but they actually turned out to be a positive. This is their cheaper entry, their more fun entry. It's around $900 cheaper. And part of those items are Maxxis tires, a little bit cheaper rim, a cast clamp, different handlebars, no map switches, items that, like I said, you look and you're like, man, that's a drawback, right? Surprisingly enough, no. A lot of these items on the bike, you start with a great chassis, a great broad motor that they already had, and throwing on these little items, they found more comfort. They found a bike that had a wider setup window. We've got the little bit more flexible swing arm from the Husqvarna mixed in there as well. And like I said, you get some of the great features from the rest of the Austrian bikes. You get a chassis that feels like it's ready to dive to the inside, that feels so nimble, but you're getting rid of some of the harshness that was there with the KTM with all those per se cheaper parts. And each rider that rode it came back genuinely surprised, like, man, I like this bike. It works well when it's rough. I can ride it to what it feels like is the edge of its potential. You feel like you're able to really get the most out of it. The engine character, once again, like the other Austrian bikes, is very linear, very broad. It's a little bit mellower off the bottom than the KTM. The GasGas only comes with a flat airbox panel, so it has a little bit more lethargic character off the bottom, but it's still fairly well mapped in the sense that it feels clean, and it feels like an overpowered 350 if I'm being really honest. And part of that just, it has a lot of fun to it because you feel like you're able to push it and push yourself on the bike. Really the only negatives at the end of the day is, for some guys, the Maxxis front tire on hard pack conditions, the fact that it doesn't have any little options or extras, and that the character of the engine is so mellow. On some of the sandier corners, the big hills, it felt like we were missing out just a little bit, but man, you can make it up in so many other places on this bike. Winning the shootout is a lot like winning a championship, and the way you do that is don't finish off the podium. And it's pretty obvious if you look at the scores for the Yamaha YZ450F, it did exactly that. Man, and there's a major reason. You take the key components of the bike, the chassis, the suspension, the motor, and they're all so good on this bike. And beyond that, they work so well in all the conditions and for all the riders, you know, skill levels, heights, weights, everything. Everybody found a way to set this bike up and make it work for them pretty much right off the bat. A little bit of negatives to the bike still do sit there. Ergonomics, it's got a very tight foot peg to seat ratio. Your knees feel like they're a little bit close to you. The handlebars are really far forward stock. Some guys like it, some of us bring it back. It doesn't have the world's greatest front brake. It has some little bit of oddballness with the plastic, but overall they've done so many other good things with this bike to refine it to the point that the suspension package is amazing. Every guy that got off this thing barely turned a clicker or two. Couples tried some different bike balance stuff, but you just look at a hole and it absorbs it. The motor has huge output and great potential. It's powerful. It doesn't quite yank you off the bike, but it's impressive how quick you get to the next section. And if it's a little bit too much, the Power Tuner app is so much more powerful in a sense than some of the buttons on the other bikes. You can really manipulate the power, tune it down, give the bike better roll character, or if you want it to bark, you can give it sharp throttle response. So it just gives everybody something they're looking for. And then the chassis itself, it's comfortable. It has a very balanced handling characteristic. Yeah, it's not as sharp into the inside some of the other bikes. Maybe it doesn't feel quite as quick and responsive, but it works for rear steer guys, front steer guys. And the biggest thing is it keeps its setup so well track to track. That track toughness, you go to GH, you go to the sand track we rode, you go ride hard pack, you ride loam, it just works well on all those situations. At the end of the day, all the riders could nitpick a couple little things on it, but when it comes down to the big picture items, it just, man, checks all the boxes. So that's it for what we call the short and sweet edition of the 2022 Vital MX 450 Shootout. Now again, this is just me rattling off a couple quick opinions as we're trying to get you the results fast for all of you that just kind of want to digest this, get a bit of entertainment value at, see the bikes in action. But if you really want to know the nitty and gritty, again, check the article on our website. That's where you're going to probably learn the most facts and technical information about the bikes. You can catch up on what's actually changed on each one of them and learn about all those little details and how those affected each rider and got them to the finishing point that they all chose. You can see all their individual scores, why this had a bike finished where it was, and if you're really looking into buying one, you can kind of read through that and find the bike that you think is going to suit you the most. And again, if you're somebody that likes digesting digital content, we'll also have, in the next couple days from this video launching, our roundtable discussion. We're going to sit down most of the riders and we're just going to BS it like you and your buddies do at the track. We're going to compare our notes. We're going to talk about how one of us liked something and the other hated it. At the end of the day, we agree and we disagree, and that's part of the fun of these shootouts, is seeing where we all find the same good points in a motorcycle, but what makes us all different and what we all look for in the bikes. Because once again, you, the viewer watching this, you may not necessarily agree with what I'm saying, but you may agree with the other guy in the test. And that's part of the key to finding the bike that's going to make you the happiest. If you like what you've been watching here on Vital MX, make sure you hit subscribe, hit the like button, support us if you can in that way. Most of you watching this content probably are not currently subscribed, and it would really help us out if you stay tuned to our channel for more.